It's time again for the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast with Dr. John Dentico. The mission of our podcast is to provide 21st century leadership training for a talent-driven world. We help organizations implement strategies and practices designed to attract, hire, engage, and retain top talent while mitigating the effects of burnout. Our guests are experts in various fields of organizational dynamics, including, but not limited to, leadership, management, communication, and coaching. They bring a world of knowledge and solutions to our viewers and listeners. I am sincerely grateful for their participation and ideas. So let's dive in. And if you enjoy our podcast, please like, share, and subscribe. We genuinely appreciate your support. Hello again and welcome to the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast. I'm Dr. John Dentico, your host. With me today is Arnaud Lucas. Arnaud is a seasoned executive with a strong track record of scaling organizations and delivering impactful results across diverse industries for big and small companies. As Chief Technology Officer at Wanderu, he led the team in doubling tech headcount and achieving record-breaking revenue in 2023. With a deep technical foundation and a passion for innovation, he excels at building high-performing teams, optimizing operations, and delivering exceptional customer experiences. He is skilled in leveraging data and technology to drive business growth, reduce costs, and navigate complex challenges. Originally from France, he possesses a master's in computer science from Université de Technologie de Campagne. Arnaud is a results-oriented leader dedicated to fostering a culture of ownership, transparency, and diversity, and I'm very pleased that he is joining me here today. Hello, Arnaud. How are you today?
Perfect. Thank you for having me, John.
Welcome. Most welcome. Glad to have you. As I like to say, let's dive right in. Arnaud, from your experience in the tech world, in the world that you live in right now, is there a struggle for talent in the tech world in which you work? And if so, can you point out what specific talents are now required?
One funny thing about talent is it doesn't matter what the market looks like. Sometimes we say, oh, it's a job seeker market. Sometimes it's an employer market. But it's always a struggle to find the right person, always. The question is why? And I think that's because every company effectively is looking for very specific things. And it could be specific technical expertise, like nowadays we talk a lot about AI and expertise around AI, which is a new domain. So obviously that expertise is far and wide still. But it's not just the technical knowledge. There is a cultural aspect that's important to companies, like making sure that person can be a good culture add to the company. And for example, at Wanderu, we promote ownership, we promote transparency, we promote the ability to take and give feedback. These are not something that all engineers are necessarily comfortable with, right? And so that's something that we need to effectively screen to make sure we find the right people. And that makes it challenging. We cannot just say, oh, let's take that person, they have the right tech. No, tech is not enough. And so that's something we're actively doing. So having the right interview process in a way that's fast, efficient, but also can find the right attributes for a candidate, both technical, culture, and so on. I think it's very important. And
I was just saying, very interesting, because you read a lot today about the layoffs in tech and the job market, if you will, in tech. Yet I make a separation between a job market, the general job market, if you will, and even in tech, with the talent market, trying to get the right people. Do you make that separation as well?
Yes, definitely. And one part of that is that from a news standpoint, we talk a lot about layoffs, and the layoffs are very added by the media and so on. But usually companies don't just lay off. On one side, they may do a layoff. On the other side, they start hiring some other expertise. Could be tech, it could be a new area of the business that they want to invest in now. So they are making all these adjustments. And before, I feel like companies were doing adjustment on a yearly basis. On a yearly basis, they will review their budget, their needs to have teams focusing on this versus that. Now I feel like that's accelerating, like companies do that more on a quarterly basis, if not more. And so that's why it feels like there are more and more, which is true. There are more adjustments, but it doesn't mean that companies are not hiring either. And I think that's one side. The other side, to your point, is that I know that one time we posted a position and we got 100 resumes in a day. For a small company, that's insane, like ours. But most people that submitted a resume were effectively not qualified. They didn't meet the need even described in the job description. And I could argue there is a lot of, I call it noise in the process, which makes it harder for companies to find the right person because of that flood of candidates that are not necessarily even right for the position submitting their candidacy in the first place, which makes it harder on both sides, effectively, because the company has to spend more time figuring out what the right candidates are for the role, and the candidates obviously are not getting the best experience either.
Okay, I understand. Yeah, and I suspect that the things that I have read about the layoffs have a lot to do with earnings. In other words, and of course, cost controls, if you want to call it that. Wall Street loves that stuff, as you well know. They love when companies are demonstrating that they are cost conscious. But as someone once said, you can't cut your way to growth. So it's very interesting. And I appreciate your perspective on this because I needed to have that filled in for me. And there was a blank in my mind in terms of, sure, we're seeing all these tech layoffs, but at the same time, there is hiring going on. And it's really more of an adjustment, as you say, a quarterly adjustment now to the growing needs, where they see themselves going in the future. So that's a very interesting perspective, and I appreciate that very much. Here's a question for you, okay? We'll move on to the next question. Let's chat about organizational structure, something I know is part of your background. And this is something that I find so interesting to me. Companies today, as you well know, are still bound up with the rigid structure of bureaucracy. All you have to do is ask an organization or company to show you their organizational chart. And there are all the boxes on the wall. And so there it is. Those charts speak loudly about the bureaucratic mindset. Yet bureaucracy really hates change. It can tolerate small incremental change, but it really has trouble with large scale transforming change. Yet we live in this VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world. How do you find balance between making swift, large scale changes when required and the barriers to making those changes posed by a bureaucratic structure?
It's a good question because from a technology standpoint, since that's my background, there is people say, oh, once something is built, right, it can just run like that forever. And that's not true, right? Any system that is being built needs to be maintained, right? Which means that some team has to own that system.
Correct.
And the question becomes less of that, which means that as a result, it's not like from an organizational aspect, there needs to be a team somewhere that keeps on maintaining a set of systems, what I prefer to call a cross-functional domain, right? An area of the business backed by tech that they need to keep on, at a minimum, maintaining. Because if you don't maintain, it just dies. Right? That's the truth in any software, in any system. As a result, that organization, that team needs to, in some shape or form, it doesn't have to be exactly the same, needs to live for the long term. Because once you own that thing is not going away, unless you decide you cut your arm, effectively you said, no, that thing is not part of it anymore. And then, okay, fine. And that's part of the tech layoffs. They say, no, that's part of the business, don't care. And they shut it off, they sell it off, they do something. But unless they do that, you need to maintain, at a minimum, you need to maintain that domain. The question is not that. The question is more like, how much do you want to do in that domain, right? How important is it to improve or add to that domain? And therefore, it's more about how big the team should be, what kind of expertise should they have, how should it be structured to have all these people in there. But so it's less about going from one team to another or changing team all the times, because if you do that, then I've been in a company like that. Every quarter, you reassign the engineers in different ways. The problem is that then there is no ownership of the system styles. So it's like putting a spotlight and moving the spotlight from quarter to quarter into a different direction, which as a business you have to do. But the question is, how can you do that in a way that you maintain ownership? You have a baseline, and then you keep on growing this one quarter, or growing that thing the other quarter instead, and being balancing people and especially engineers from one to the other, so that there is still that ownership on one side, but you can move people effectively on the other, so that you get hopefully the best of both worlds, where you have ownership, you can keep your system going, you can keep your product going, you can keep your business going on one side, and then on the other side you can invest into what's important to the business at the moment. And people say, yeah, but engineers don't like to make a change, they don't like to work on something else. That's actually not true from my experience, because my talent acquisition problem about finding the right people. But I've had the luck in working with a lot of very talented engineers that are also flexible. And usually they love a new challenge. If you tell them I have this new thing that we're trying to accomplish over there, say, yeah, sign me up. Yeah, let's go. So because they want the learning as well. Like they want to have that opportunity to learn something new. And so usually it's the other problem where you need somebody to keep the lights on one side, and you need this other engineers to do this new thing. And usually picking up the people for the new thing is a hard part, because everybody, or not everybody, but a lot of people would prefer to work on the new thing, on the new focus of the business.
Yeah, people love to be creative. I'm convinced of that. And what you've said, it's interestingly enough, you said it differently than I would say it, but it mirrors very much my perspective. And that is this, that there is a complementary process between leadership and management, okay? That they need each other, they work together with each other. And every organization needs structure. You have to have structure. And bureaucracy provides structure. But like you said, it keeps things going. It keeps the clock on time, if you will. So in incremental changes, I look at management as doing the ownership part, as you talked about it. It's the small changes. It keeps things moving along. Whereas leadership to me is more about, this is the new thing. We have to make changes. We have to do something substantial here. We have to make large scale change. So I agree with you. I think there has to be this complementary process between leadership and management, that the outputs and the work is different, but they should in fact complement each other. So thanks very much. I would agree with you. Let's talk a little bit about empowerment. I know you said this. So I want to offer you an idea. I want to offer you a statement, and then I'd like to get your reflection on that. It's something I've been working on and thinking about. When we talk, if you look up the definition of empowerment in a dictionary, what you will find is several words. two words that stand out to me. One, of course, is delegation. Okay, delegation. And we've been talking about delegation for 50 years. When I began my career, we talked about delegation. And as I like to say, the knock against delegation many times has been people delegate the responsibility without delegating the authority to carry out that responsibility. I'm sure you've seen that in your work career. You have someone who has the responsibility, keeps going back to the manager or the leader and saying, can I do that? Is it okay? Can I do that? I got you to this point. Can I do that? That kind of a thing. And I know you don't support that. But so if we use delegation as a way of determining direction, just for a second, transference. Normally, when we talk about empowerment, we talk about empowerment from the more senior people in the organization to the junior people in the organization. That's the normal way of talking about it. And empowerment, as you well know, has become a mega word. You can't look on the internet today without seeing empowerment everywhere. But I think there's a hidden side to empowerment that many people don't consider. And that is simply this. Take in your field, in your tech field, you have I would imagine, very highly skilled, educated people who come through the door to work. Maybe some of them have 5, 10, 15, 20 years experience, like you're over 20 years experience like yourself. Isn't it true that people, if we're talking about direction now, isn't it true that people delegate the power of their background, their experience, and their education to the organization? So in a sense, if I work for you, I come in the door and I say, I have power. Here's my power, education, background, experience. I've worked on these different projects. I'm going to give that to you. I'm going to delegate that to you. So in a sense, we talk about, and by the way, that has a term. There's a specific term. It's called subsidiarity. Subsidiarity is me delegating my power to the organization. How do you feel about that? Any reflection on that at all?
I like it because I think that's totally true. But for me, it's not the full story. The part I like about it is you're right. And that's what the organization looks for. They look for these powers that the people are bringing to the organization and to use those powers. That's exactly why we want to find talent, is to bring expertise, critical thinking, all the things that the people have cultivated in different ways. They have cultivated them because they read about them and they want to apply them because they have that experience from before. They learn in school. They acquire that expertise that's valuable for the organization. And therefore, the organization wants to use that expertise to ultimately grow the business more for the business. So that's totally true. Where I come is that a lot of the way I'm understanding your statement, which I don't believe is necessarily what you're thinking, but the side effect, if you want, of your statement to me when I'm listening to that, is therefore that you become slave to the company as a result, maybe that you lend your powers and now it's just the company telling you, you need to do this, you need to do that, and the person just doing what they are being asked, using their powers. And for me, that's not part of the power of somebody in tech, like a strong engineer, is to be able to think for themselves, right? Is to be able to come up with ideas, to cultivate innovation in their own way. And for me, when I think about empowerment, that's what I'm thinking, right? Is how do I unlock the full potential, not just from, oh, I know you can do X, please do X, but also we have this problem here, we have this area over there. It could be a system, it could be a full domain, it could be a business area, it could be part of a product. We have this thing over there that we really need somebody to really go deep on, and please do that. And you do the thinking, you reach out for help, You gather the expertise, you collaborate with product and design and data and so on to get the right input so that you can actually so you can produce the right result effectively and the right impact ultimately. So while I agree about lending your powers, I also really strongly believe in not micromanaging those powers, but instead letting the person use their powers to the best of their ability within an area that they can own effectively. That they have to be accountable for. So there is two sides of the coin here, but as well that they can own and they can do what they believe the right thing for that area, and they can use their expertise and the expertise of others in the best way possible.
Yeah. The reason I like to bring that idea up in terms of a person delegating, if you will, their power to the organization, because I think, and from what I know about your background, I think it agrees significantly with this idea of a learning organization. Okay. So let me just go a little further down the road on this. When I think about leadership, for example, and I've mentioned this many times in my previous podcasts, my model of leadership that I started developing 30 years ago is built on one premise, and the premise is contribution. I make no judgments about people. I don't do that. What I say is, here's a problem. I'm sure you see this all the time. Here's a software problem, for example. Here's an issue. Here's a hardware problem, perhaps. Who has an idea? Anybody want to help us figure out how we can, I'll use this term, learn our way through this? How can we take the power of a learning organization, the idea of this contributory leadership perspective that I believe in wholeheartedly, and say, let's unleash the power of the people to help us create a pathway, a solution perhaps, but a pathway to a solution. So that to me is very important. When you acknowledge that, when you acknowledge the contribution from people, you open that door up. You open it all up and you say, okay, here it is. Let's all work on this together. How do you feel about that?
Oh yeah, no, totally, like 100%. Even as a leader, I think my primary job is to provide direction. But to your point, I'm not the one to provide solutions. Right? We hire very smart people that are close to an area, that have the expertise to deal with that area, so that they can own it and deal with it and do what is needed to be successful. And to your point about unleashing somebody's potential, everybody is different. So obviously different management style about how to cultivate that. But the hope at the end is that person can really own their area so that when there is an issue, I don't have to tell them what to do. They can think for themselves. They can come up with the right solution. Now, I'm happy to help. I'm not just here, oh, you better need to fix it. No, it's just, okay, how can I help? Let's show them, what did you think about that thing? Or maybe, that's weird. I remember that other team making that change earlier this week. Could it be related? But contributing more as if I were part of their team, and instead of telling them what to do.
I agree. I think there's so much creativity to be had. And I think in many organizations, that creativity is tamped down, is suppressed. And then they walk around saying, we don't know, why can't we get these people turned up? Why can't we get them spun up, as I like to say? And the reason is, I talk about the big three now that I talk about all the time, and that is, people want to work for an organization whose values align with their own. Two is, they want to be involved in the decision-making processes of the organization. They want to matter. They want their work to matter. They want to be masters of their own fate. I like to use that term. And third is, they want training and learning that helps them develop. Here's the big three. I tell audiences and people all the time, look, if you don't have this upfront and personal. That's the personal touch here with people. That's the thing you want to let them know. This is what we're behind. This is what we believe in. And then you got to live to it. So it's a very interesting dynamic. And I hope people get better at it. I want to ask you a question. One of the things I noted in your bio was this notion of the democratization of data. You talk about that. Can you explain that? Explain what that means? Democratization of data.
So companies, doesn't matter what size of companies, have a lot of data. They acquire a lot of data about anything. Because Wanderu being a marketplace, there is a customer side, the end user side buying tickets, there is a supplier side, the partners that provide the inventory, and there is a lot of data flowing through that. But in organizations, it's very hard to make that data actionable. So making it so that employees, and employees, not just tech people, but anybody in the organization having access to the right level of data so that they can make the right decisions. It's all about decision making. I think making assumptions, having gut instincts about something is great, but I always love to back it up with some data. To say, yes, that sounds like a good direction. Maybe you do some testing just to validate some things, something just to gather data. And so the question becomes, how do you make that data easily accessible to employees? And it's actually a very hard problem, right? Previous organization, what I've seen is that ultimately you need a middle layer, effectively. Data analysts, business analysts, some people that what they do every day is that they're in the data and people can ask them questions and they give you the data. So the problem is that that's very, I wanted to call it inefficient. I'm not sure that's the right term because they do bring a lot of value. It's very inefficient because for me, it means that one, it's not fast. If you have to ask somebody else, like it's at any handoff, if you ask somebody else for something, it's going to take a while. Even if that person is available right now, but most likely they have other things that they are trying to do, they have a different roadmap that they are trying to go after and so on. So there is a lag, a latency. Two, it means that you need to formulate specific questions that you have about the data. And that's a problem too, because sometimes you don't know what you don't know. Be able to ask questions about data that you may not know about. Most likely what will mean is that you are going to ask very generic questions first, and then you are going to come back and say, no, I need to know exactly about this, and so on. Right? A way to do that in that mode, and same thing, you give the context to that analyst, you make them understand what problem you're trying to solve, and then you're delegating them trying to figure out everything about the data that can help solve that problem or give you at least insights into it. Because you cannot solve a problem you don't know about. So you need that data. Now, what I prefer to do, and as technology advances is becoming easier and easier, is effectively to make that data actionable to people right there in the tool. So that you have a tool that is becoming easier and easier to use now. There is no good generic data tool you can use. So sometimes the tool is more about user behavioral insights. Sometimes the tool is more about inventory insights. But there are tools that exist where people can just go and explore the data on their own. They are not limited to, oh, I have this one question I need to answer. They can work their way in. They can look at replays of different things. They can look at quantitative feedback that they have received with qualitative feedback that they have received and try the two together and identify hotspots and pain points and friction but also opportunities where I say, oh, people seem to really enjoy that thing. Like we should do more of that and so on. But that's thanks to them exploring things on their own terms. And that means that by doing that, effectively, instead of trying to delegate that problem solving to somebody else, they can try to solve their problems and be inspired by the data versus having to have that intermediary effectively that makes it very hard for them to get the right level of data that they need.
Okay. All right, fine. Listen, let me ask you my last question as we're
Huh?
getting close to the end, and that is, if you had a magic wand and could wave it at one particular issue or problem, what would that issue be, and why did you choose that?
I think for me, it's all about organization learning and the ability to adapt. So as technology change rapidly, and we have a very market change rapidly, like everything change rapidly, and it's only getting faster. People mentioned that companies have a lot of data. They struggle to effectively make the right decision based on the data. I think for me, it goes back to having the right culture and having a culture of experimentation, I shall say. So that means making sure data is accessible, of course, but also for me, something I feel strongly about is being able to iterate. And a lot of companies, I feel ability to iterate quickly is not there. Usually, you talk about bureaucracy earlier on. Usually, there are a lot of bureaucracy to go through to try anything. And that kind of goes against that ownership level of ownership or that trust that you have in people making the right decisions. So for me, it's having the right learning mindset. It's sort of organization enabling that learning mindset, meaning that letting people learn and experiment and iterate and and be able to make the decisions to do. And for me, what I would love is in more organizations having more that culture of continuous learning and adaptation through iteration. Nothing is a revolution. People say, oh, yeah, we are going to start a new business area altogether. You can do that, but usually it's based on a bunch of things that the company is already doing, that the company has already learned. They don't just go there from scratch. It's not, oh, today I'm making screws, tomorrow I'm going to do AI. No, that doesn't work that way. There's always a foundation that the company relies on to make their next jump into a new opportunity. And the more they can cultivate the ability to learn from that and adapt, the better, because that makes these kind of jumps much easier in the future too.
Yeah, I agree. I think people are so reluctant to give people the opportunity to make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
And if you make a mistake, you learn.
Oh, yeah.
And you've got to be, there has to be people, senior managers and leaders have to be able to tolerate that if they want to turn the creativity of people on, if they want them to truly be creative. And as we know, in this world that we live in, something shows up on our doorstep, if you will. We may not have the solution, but we can learn our way to the solution.
Mm-hmm.
As we focus on it, we work together, we figure out what works. And sometimes you figure out what works by figuring out what doesn't work first. So that you've got to be able to take that and learn from it. And in the end, it makes the organization and the people a lot stronger. So I agree with you so much. Arnaud, thank you so very much for being with me today on the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast. I really appreciate your input. I wish you all the success in the future, and you have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, John. It was a pleasure. I really enjoyed it.